StarCraft 1 is a war film. It and its Brood War expansion closely resemble something like Frank Herbert's Dune novel, tackling themes of betrayal, political squabbles, unlikely alliances, and the absolute horror of war. It's no coincidence that Dune lends itself well to, and has indeed inspired several real-time strategy games. They're more or less cut from the same cloth. StarCraft is a story about cause and effect, how the callous actions of a regime can lead to its downfall, and how the man who instigated it eventually becomes the very thing he sought to take down because of it, or how the pawns he sacrificed to make it happen end up deposing him, or how one creator race, blind to their own hubris, begot two civilizations that ended up slaughtering one another in their creator's name. It's a story about vicious cycles, an ambitious space opera with a grand, multi-faction narrative, punctuated by tragedy and tempered by levity and dark humor.
Looks like you mashed some poor fella's dog, Sarge.
And StarCraft 2 is not that. While it does have its moments, it takes the lofty, morally complex ethos of the original and simplifies it to its absolute most base summary, to the point where it becomes a caricature of itself. Mengsk is no longer a complex, competent, and dangerous character. He is now one-dimensionally bad, incompetent, and impotent. Raynor and Kerrigan's complicated histories and motivations are discarded in favor of turning them into bland action figure avatars of their respective races, as well as the most cliché power couple in the known galaxy. The Zerg and Protoss become black and white bad guys and good guys, along with a token evil tribe to justify good guys fighting Protoss. And though it poked fun at the Warcraft comparison, one prophecy trope and a cartoony villain later, StarCraft 2 really did become just Warcraft in space. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying this game's story. There's also nothing wrong with getting the fuck out of my video. While some interesting ideas are introduced in Wings of Liberty, Legacy of the Void, and that's it, there's an overall sense of unfulfillment when reaching the end of the final campaign. Perhaps it's the simplified plot elements, perhaps it's Kerrigan turning into a Pokemon. Whatever the case, StarCraft just feels like it's lost its way by the end. Which begs the question, what would constitute a better ending to this series? Now, it's tough to discuss the ending without also touching on the rest of the game, but that's sadly beyond the scope of this video. But the reason I mentioned the ending specifically is because someone impressed upon me the idea that perhaps this would be a better ending. Let me explain. In terms of consistency, characters in StarCraft 2 have none. Raynor promises to kill Sarah, only to save her instead, then be angry at her, then be cool with her, lose her, and then be with her, in that order. Kerrigan goes from good to bad to apparently changing her ways, but not really, except she's one of the good guys now. Actually, she's the ultimate good guy and savior of the universe. Zeratul is an outcast turned savior turned exile, then arrested, then savior again, then killed. The Zerg are a parasitic race carefully evolved by the Xel'Naga in the fires of Xeris, later retconned into this atrocity, and end up as some kind of hippie tribe led by a faceless goat. I could go on. This happens when a series confuses character U-turns and retcons with subversion and shock value. Also when you think that more twists equal a better story. But if you stick to just one, and also have it be at least somewhat foreshadowed, it can work pretty well. Which brings us back to this image of Raynor walking away with Kerrigan in his arms, which, in the context of just Wings of Liberty, is not that big of a stretch. The thing is, if you look at Jimmy's backstory, he's not exactly a squeaky clean guy. He's kind of a bad boy.
I'm a bad boy.
His position as Marshal of Confederate shithole Marsara was a very brief stint in his life, and it comes after a long history of him being a bit of a delinquent. And it's succeeded by him continuing to be a delinquent, by siding with a separatist group and sticking it to the man. And two of the only people he opened up to ended up betraying and almost murdering him. What I'm trying to say is Raynor is the audience surrogate and thus one of the more morally sound characters, but he's not like lawful good or anything. He's just a guy who's in way over his head and has aligned himself with whichever side was able to ensure his survival or further his goals more than once. He's what I'd call lawful neutral, sometimes teetering towards chaotic good. Now, I mentioned vicious cycles in the beginning, and if you've been paying attention to Brood War, you'll have noticed that the story was grooming Raynor to become the next perpetuator of the cycle. Mengsk is betrayed by the Confederacy, so he rebels against them and fucking kills them. Kerrigan is betrayed by Mengsk, so she rebels against him and fucking kills him. Raynor is betrayed by Kerrigan, so he rebels against her and
Jim?
doesn't kill her. Breaking the cycle of vengeance is what this was all about. The greater plot about hybrids and the end of all life, that's not as important as this one smaller, more humane aspect of the story. Because this is what we all relate to, not the big uber conflict. And to those who think killing Tychus perpetuates the cycle of violence, I don't think that's thematically accurate. Think about it. Tychus is an ex-con with ties to Jimmy who got in trouble with the law, chose not to reform, and who's still metaphorically and literally trapped by his past. He is Raynor. He's Raynor's negative, his doppelganger. Everything James stands to become if he keeps going down this path. So in shooting Tychus, his double, his bitter clone, he walks away from war, from hatred, from vengeance. This is subversive, it's kind of a 180 twist, but it's a pretty well prepared one in the end. It can work if you don't fuck with it 3 more times. This really looks like it could be the end of Jimmy's story, staying a rebel till the end and choosing waifu over vengeance. And you might think that it's no different than the ending we got for him, except there's a huge fucking difference. Getting a second chance to rescue the human being that he lost is not the same as simping for fucking Goku after she killed a couple 100,000 more people in her quest for vengeance. One's a de-infested victim of war, the other's a cross between Captain Planet and Skeletor. And now that I think of it, the ending of Wings of Liberty feels pretty final. And by the way, you ever realize that we've had the Protoss cap off a story, and we've had the Zerg end off a story, but we've never seen the Terrans finish one? They never got to be the final chapter in any of the campaign trilogies, so it would be pretty interesting to flip these around and let the Terrans have the final say for once. I mean, just imagine if this wasn't the final shot of Wings, but the end of a long, drawn-out war, with ups and downs, betrayals and loss, and the final thing you're left with is this portrait. That wouldn't be all that bad. On the other hand, the idea of reversing Kerrigan's mutation is a monumental cop-out, and I always kinda hated it. And the game knows that because it constantly poses the question, would you really cure her? Does she deserve it at this point? What would be the repercussions of it? And in the end, there were no repercussions. Not really. Jimmy's fine, the supporting cast is fine, Kerrigan became the savior of the galaxy. But if you switch things up and put this scene at the very end of StarCraft 2, it wouldn't be that bad, all things considered, because it complements the war is hell and innocents get caught in the middle message of the first game, the solution being, as an individual, to just walk away from the cycle of vengeance and salvage what's left of your sanity and decency. And it's one way the game can have its love story cake and eat it without it getting too yucky. Now obviously this isn't much of an improvement to the overall story of the game, because that would take way more encouragement than this, but it is an idea I found interesting enough to share. But now it's time for some love and vitriol, some spamming and emoji. What does this image inspire in your minds? If Wings of Liberty was the end, or rather, if this scene was the end of the entire StarCraft 2 trilogy, how would that make you feel? Share your thoughts below, comments make me stronger.